All right, guys. So for this lecture, we're going to take a little bit of a look at cells and tissues, just a basic introduction real quick, and then we're going to go into talking about all of the different types of muscle tissue as well as nervous tissue for this portion. We're going to do our best to try to split this unit up into a couple different pieces. There's a lot of tissue, but hopefully by splitting it up a little bit, that will kind of help. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is just kind of cells and tissues themselves. Last unit, we talked a little bit about organization of multicellular organisms within that first unit, but this is just kind of talking a little bit about the same thing. So cells and tissues, cells are really what are carrying out a lot of those chemical activities in our body that really help us stay alive. All right, so whether that is exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen, getting rid of nutrients, bringing the vital nutrients like carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, all of those things to our cells. Our cells carry those out for us, okay? We've already defined cells before, so that next bullet point shouldn't be a big issue there. And then tissues, that's all just simply a definition of basic tissues, okay? All right, cell diversity is really what we're going to get into in this unit, though. And you can see just in one body part, we've got several different types of cells and several different types of tissue, okay? So you can see kind of we'll work our way across the top of the arm there first, and then I'll come back and work across the bottom, both from right to left. So the first one you see up here in the top left is epithelial tissue. This is essentially our skin. Our skin is mostly made of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue also lines a lot of our body cavities as well as surfaces. So if we have an internal or an external surface that is open, meaning that there isn't something directly connected to it, it's going to be lined with epithelial tissue. So your skin, the outer layers of your skin, are all epithelial tissue, right? Next one you see here is muscle tissue. That's just this bicep muscle that you see here, okay? It's made up of these fibers that both contract and relax. Nervous tissue is another one, so there's lots of nerves that run down through both sides of the hand, and those are there to kind of send and receive messages, okay? We also have some tissue called connective tissue. All right, loose connective tissue is in a lot of the layers of our skin. It really like binds things together. So loose connective tissue often connects different layers of tissue. So hopefully when we get back to school, if we get a chance to dissect, you're going to notice that when you remove the skin from some of these organs, or even the cat when we dissect it, there's what looks like cotton web or almost spider web in between layers of tissue, and that is actually connective tissue, loose connective tissue specifically. All right, bone is another type of connective tissue that we have. All right, you can see it has this very telltale concentric circles, with this opening in the middle, and that's what bone tissue looks like. Cartilage is another one. We see a lot of cartilage in between all the bones of our body, so there would be cartilage here in the shoulder joint. There's going to be cartilage here at the elbow, right? And that really is there to help kind of smooth that joint between bones, right? And then another type of connective tissue that we have is blood, right? That would be passing through the system, circulatory system here, and you can see there's a combination of both red blood cells. These are the little guys that kind of look like frisbees, right? And there's also white blood cells here, okay? All right, a little bit more of cell diversity just shows you the different kind of categories. So we have a group of cells that actually connect body parts. Those are connective tissue, okay? So these are things like fibroblasts. These are erythrocytes. Erythrocytes essentially are just red blood cells. They look like little biconcave discs. They're actually hollow in the center and fat around the outside. All right, if you're used to like a pool float, okay, they kind of look like that. They've got an opening in the center, but it's not completely open, and then they're fat around the outsides. This is your basic fat cell, okay? And then these are white blood cells. So this would be like a lysosome here, okay? The next category of tissue are cells that actually cover and line a lot of the parts of our body. So this would be epithelial cells, all right? You can see they're categorized by this very close together knit group of cells. They always have one free or kind of what we call open surface. It's usually referred to as the apical surface. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to epithelial cells, though, as well. All right. We also have a group of cells that are responsible for gathering information and then controlling things. That's our nervous cells here. We'll talk a little bit about those when we get to them. And then we have cells that are responsible for moving organs about the body. All right, so that's the skeletal muscle tissue down here at the bottom, as well as smooth muscle tissue you can see here. All right, and then the last one we have are cells of reproduction. Okay, so these are, this is a sperm cell. Okay, so those would be both sperm and egg cells. So sperm would be male reproductive cells, egg would be female reproductive cells. Okay. All right, so when we talk about tissues in this unit, we're really talking about those specialized functions that each one of those tissues have. So we're going to go through each one of those categories and talk a little bit about their specific jobs. Those cells are grouped really by what they do and how they're designed. Okay, so they're both their structure as well as their function. There's four main primary types. We have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and finally muscle tissue. We're going to start with the last two categories, nervous and muscle tissue. All right, there's not as many types of those. And then we'll try to finish up the unit talking a little bit about epithelium as well as connective tissue. There's quite a few different categories of those. So connective tissue will actually split up into two different lectures because there's so many of them. And epithelial tissue we'll try to leave as one lecture. Okay. All right, so let's start with muscle tissue. There are three main types, and muscle tissue's basic job or basic function is to provide or produce movement, either movement from A to B, like skeletal muscle tissue would do, or cardiac muscle tissue is simply providing movement for blood, and then smooth muscle tissue is providing movement usually inside of some sort of hollow organ, like large intestine, small intestine, stomach, trachea, esophagus, all of those are kind of lined with smooth muscle tissue, and they're designed to help us move structures. Okay. So let's start with skeletal muscle tissue. It is our only type of tissue, or type of muscle tissue that is actually what we call voluntary, meaning that it allows us to consciously control that type of tissue. All the other types of muscle tissue that we have are involuntary. All right. But skeletal muscle tissue is the only type that you can say, hey, I want to pick up a cup, bend my elbow, I'm going to consciously contract my bicep to be able to do that. Okay. Skeletal muscle tissue is always hallmarked by some sort of an attachment to a part of the skeleton. Okay. The other thing that skeletal muscle tissue has that some of the other ones do not is this, what they're called striated, meaning they look like they have stripes. To me, it almost looks like kind of like fish skin, or if you've ever filleted a fish, well, before you cook it, you can actually see these striations in the muscle tissue in the fish. Okay. Skeletal muscle tissue also usually has one or more nucleuses. All right. So these little dark circles that you see throughout this whole slide right here, that is the nuclei of the muscle cell. All right. Same thing up here. One muscle cell stretches all the way across this whole slide. Okay. So muscle cells are very long. There usually isn't a dividing line in between them, or at least you can't see it. All right. And then they're bundled together in these things called fibers. Okay. Here's another picture of skeletal muscle tissue just a little bit closer. Again, you can see the stripes or striations. All right. And then you can see the dark nuclei in between all of them. Okay. The other big thing here, and when I show you cardiac muscle tissue, you'll be able to see the difference. Skeletal muscle tissue has this nice unbroken kind of uniform stripe all the way across. When you see cardiac here on the next slide, you're going to notice cardiac has these little lines that kind of go up and down, and it's in different sections. So skeletal muscle tissue goes all the way across, nice, smooth, uniform, but it is striated. Okay. This is another picture of skeletal muscle tissue. All right. Again, stripes, striations, nice nuclei, nice uniform appearance all the way across the slide. Okay. All right. Cardiac muscle tissue, on the other hand, all right, obviously by its name, is only found in the heart. Its only function is to pump or move blood. Again, it's involuntary. Skeletal muscle tissue is our only voluntary one. We cannot control the rate that our heart beats, nor can we control the strength that our heart beats. That is all done by our central nervous system. All right. So all of that is controlled by that. Cells of this are always going to attach to other cells. They don't attach to any muscle tissue or anything else. And they are connected by these little things called intercalated discs. All right. I was talking on the previous slide about these lines. So you can see there's these very dark striations in between all of the smaller, kind of more faint striations. Those intercalated discs are the junction between cardiac muscle tissue cells. So from one dark line to the other dark line is one cardiac muscle cell. Okay, they're still striated, and they usually only have one nucleus. Okay, so you won't see as many of those dark circles throughout the whole thing. You'll only see a few here scattered around. Okay, here's another slide of that. Again, you can see not as many nucleuses. We still have the striations, but now you can see these really dark lines here, these intercalated discs in between each one of those cells. So here's one line, here's another line, and there's one cell in between. Very different from the skeletal muscle slide that I showed, where the cell goes all the way across and it's unbroken. This one has these lines that kind of break it apart. All right, another picture. The arrows are simply pointing to those intercalated discs. The striations don't show up as well on this picture, all right, but you can see that's the telltale sign there. These lines, these really dark lines that break that microscope slide up, or the difference in between those cells. Okay. All right, last one of the muscle tissues is smooth muscle tissue. So smooth muscle tissue is also involuntary. It's always going to be inside or be a layer that's incorporated into some sort of hollow organ. Okay. It's always attached just to other smooth muscle tissue, or it can be attached to some connective tissue. Unlike the other two that we just saw, this one has no striation. So if you look at the slide down here, you don't see that telltale striping. Okay. And then again, we have one nucleus per cell. The other thing with smooth muscle tissue is they a lot of times say it looks like a spindle. All right. This picture up here is probably the best one. Let me see if I can grab a pen here for you. So the reason why they say it looks like a spindle is because it's sort of thin right here on the ends, and then it gets kind of fat or thicker here in the center. So if I draw that a little bit here, so again, we have this kind of thin edge, kind of fat in the middle, right? Again, thin edge, fat in the middle, all right? That's pretty telltale of a smooth muscle tissue. And then there usually is going to be some sort of nucleus here in the center, okay? It's a pretty crude drawing, but hopefully that'll help a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide then. All right. So next slide is talking a little bit about nervous tissue. All right. We don't really have a whole lot of examples of nervous tissue. So there is several different types of nerves themselves, but nervous tissue usually is found in conjunction with other types of tissue. So there's not as many characterizations or different portions of it like there was that we saw for these other skeletal muscle tissues. Okay, so nervous tissue is comprised of both neurons as well as these what are called support cells, right? Cells that kind of support or hold these together. Again, this is the big thing with nerve tissue. Its function is to send impulses and receive impulses from areas of the body. And it has two basic properties. One is called irritability. So that's essentially the ability to excite this nerve or to signal it to start. And conductivity, so the ability to transmit an impulse from one side of the nerve cell to the other side of the nerve cell. Okay, this is pretty characteristic of nerve cells when you see them on a microscope slide. They have these really dark kind of cell bodies, right? And these little what look like hairs or tentacles that stick out away from it. Okay. Here's another picture. Again, nice dark cell body, little hairs that kind of stick out away from it. One nucleus usually right here in the center. All right, and one last picture of that. So this is a little better. Not as well defined as you can see here, but again, nice dark cell body, little tentacles kind of sticking out away from it. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and finish up there. Big takeaways from today. You need to know the three types of muscle tissue. Okay, so know your skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. And you also need to know nervous tissue. Now, I will say that we are going to have a little bit of a cell practical at the end where we'll show you some slides, and you'll have to be able to pick out the different pictures. There's a really nice demonstration in your workbook, all right? So you might want to take a little bit of a look at that. I think it's page, so it's the second, so chapter 3, All right, we'll try to assign a little bit of some of those workbook pages as we go through, but those are your big takeaways from today. Know your 3 types of muscle tissue and be able to identify them, and know your only type of nervous tissue and be able to identify it.